It would be almost inconceivable that any president would allow something of that nature out, anything that would disclose sources and method. Those are things we protect.
But the president did not break the law.
The only implication here is that he's unschooled. This is his first go-around with sensitive information, and he might have slipped up. If he did, it's not good. On the other hand, if it's not deliberate, it's not exactly a high crime and misdemeanor.
And last night, the president's national security advisor denied that intelligence sources and methods were disclosed. But General McMaster did not deny that classified information was revealed. And now we're waiting for General McMaster to hold another briefing at the bottom of the hour after President Trump defended himself in a tweet this morning. Our Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with more on this story developing by the minute. John?
Heather, good morning to you. The White House is pushing back hard against the idea that the president disclosed anything to the Russians that he shouldn't have in that meeting last week. As you said, H.R. McMaster will be in the Brady briefing room at 11:30 this morning. Ostensibly, this is to kind of tee up the president's trip to Saudi Arabia, Israel, Belgium, and Italy, which begins at the end of this week. But you can bet that most of what we'll be talking about this morning is the story that broke last night. H.R. McMaster came out of the White House last evening, just before 8 o'clock, to say that the story that the president did something inappropriate was completely false. Listen here.
Two other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. And I was in the room. It didn't happen. Thanks, everybody.
Now, what do we know? Of course, there was the meeting that the president had last Tuesday with the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, on the left, and Sergei Kislyak, who was the Russian ambassador to the United States, on the right. Officials tell me that terrorism was on the agenda for that meeting. And the president tweeted this morning, quote, "As president, I wanted to share with Russia, brackets, at an openly scheduled White House meeting, which I have the absolute right to do, facts pertaining to terrorism and airline flight safety, humanitarian reasons, plus I want Russia to greatly step up their fight against ISIS and terrorism." White House officials say that Russia is under similar threat as the United States. Don't forget, a Russian jetliner was brought down by ISIS on October 31st, 2015. The U.S. has issued a ban on laptops in the cabin of planes coming from Middle East countries, considering expanding that ban to include Europe and maybe beyond that. And officials say it's only logical that the president would share information about common threats with a country that he is trying to encourage to partner to a greater degree in the fight against ISIS. Now, as to the leak, the White House is close to apoplectic about this latest leak. That's the only way really to describe it. A White House official told me last night that the fact that someone would leak information like this is, quote, astonishing, that it shows, quote, an extraordinary lack of concern for national security. Officials here do have an idea of where this leak originated, who leaked this, though they are not prepared at this point to point fingers at anyone. But it does look like, Heather, what happened here, and this is not to say it's what happened, but it looks like what happened here, was that the notes of the meeting were circulated to a small group of people electronically through an email, and then somebody booted that information out the back door to sources outside the White House and to the Washington Post. Heather?
No, emails getting people in trouble again. John Roberts, thank you so much. Very serious stuff. Thank you.
To more of the fallout now, with lawmakers voicing concerns. West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin says the president's actions jeopardized our country's security.
The rules of the Senate and the rules of the executive branch or the president is much different from what you all have been reporting. With that being said, the security of our nation is put at risk anytime these types of things, no matter who says it. I am not defending, I am not basically jumping on, if you will, but the bottom line, I would say, Mr. President, this country depends on you. 330 million people depend on you to keep us safe and secure. That means having the best flow of information that allows us to protect ourselves and making sure we can stop any attacks that might happen anywhere to an American. This is not the way to conduct that.
Joining us now is Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief at The Hill. So interesting what's going on here, because since about 4:30 yesterday afternoon when this story broke, Eastern time, Bob, all of Washington has been just aflame with reports that the president has, betrayed some kind of national security secrets. And yet his national security advisor, who's about to step to the podium there in the White House, is saying it didn't happen.
Right.
So what are we to believe here?
Well, I mean, John, it's definitely a tumultuous time in Washington. I've never seen such a time with such angst at the president from his own party. I think it's a very good move for the White House and McMaster to address the press. As you guys mentioned, he addressed the press but took no questions yesterday. So you have bombshell on top of bombshell. You have Jim Comey being fired, investigations about that, and now you have this information getting out to the Washington Post, the White House denying it, but we need more information of exactly what they're denying, and I do think it's probably a small group of people that had access to that meeting and those emails. So this is something that Republicans on Capitol, they want to get back to the agenda, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who's not fond of the president's tweeting, and he wants to talk about health care and tax reform, but this is just taking all the oxygen out of the room.
Well, and of course, President Trump blasted Hillary Clinton during the election time and time again for mishandling classified information, and now there is this allegation anyway. It's difficult, obviously, to know what happened here exactly, but there's this allegation that the president somehow spilled the beans to the Russians.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the fact that he hammered Hillary Clinton throughout 2016 on her mishandling of classified information makes this a big political problem for the president. At the same time, is it normal for the president to be talking to Russian diplomats about ISIS, about terrorism? Yes. That is the one thing that bonds Russia and the United States is battling ISIS. Of course, there's complications with Syria and the Assad regime. But what did he reveal? Was it classified, or was it just kind of normal discussions that diplomats have? That remains to be seen.
But there are obviously a lot of people in high places in Washington who do not like this president. Some even don't think he is legitimate. I'm just, stating their point of view. And clearly there are people who will do anything they can to undermine his position.
Yeah, no, that's right. And that's what frustrates the White House and the president, is that the intel community is definitely at war with President Trump. I don't see that ending anytime soon. There have been leaks. There have been a lot of leaks from the White House, but there have been a lot of leaks from the intel community, which reveal, especially in the Michael Flynn case, sources and methods, and that's a crime. So you just have this tumultuous time in Washington where everybody is kind of rolling their eyes of what's the next thing to drop. And Republicans, remember, they have the White House, they have Congress, and they need to get a big legislative win. And before this, Trump got a big win with health care getting through the House. It's already mid-May, but they don't have a big signature law that's been signed by the president, and they need that within the next 2 to 3 months.
H.R. McMaster, the national security advisor, came out to the podium yesterday and said, I was in the room. It did not happen.
Yeah.
Hard to understand what more he might say at this press briefing that's about to take place that would go beyond that would put this issue to bed once and for all.
There's been a lot of criticism of President Trump's appointments, but not on his national security team, whether it's McMaster or whether it's Mad Dog Mattis at the Pentagon getting bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. So they're going to have to be putting their reputations on the line with whatever happened during that meeting. They've got a lot of credibility, but how they handle this at 11:30 is going to be a big indication of whether this story fades or actually inflames.
All right, Bob Cusack from the Hill. It's going to be interesting to hear what the National Security Advisor has to say. He's scheduled in about 21 minutes from now. Bob, thank you.
John.
And as we continue to watch that, some breaking developments, a possible suspect in the cyber attack holding computers hostage all around the world. Cybersecurity experts now believe that the Lazarus Group, a hacker organization linked to North Korea, could be behind the ransomware, I should say, attack. Joining us now live from London is Greg Palcott. He's a Fox News senior foreign affairs correspondent, and he has more. Greg, what's the latest?
Heather, yeah, that's right. Experts are saying that at least circumstantial evidence is pointing to the possibility that North Korea could be linked to these attacks involving a worldwide cyber attack against computers, as you noted. Now, so far, the ransomware, which literally holds these computers hostage, has hit about 300,000 devices in about 150 countries. The ransoms paid out have been relatively low, but economists now say that the economic cost could be be literally in the billions of dollars. And experts are now saying North Korea could have a hand in all of this. Cybersecurity firms, including in South Korea today, are underscoring this. We've known for a long time that Kim Jong-un has built up kind of a small army of geek crooks that have done damage in the past, but in the past 24 hours or so, some experts are seeing similarities in what they call the computer code involved in these attacks, and they find them similar to other attacks that North Korea has allegedly also been allowed in, involved in. They always deny that they've been involved, including the 2014 attack against Sony Pictures. Remember, they were putting out a movie critical, or making fun of, shall I say, the North Korean leader. Again, not definitive, but could be another black mark against the rogue regime. Meanwhile, according to the experts today, the spread of this cyber attack, well, it is slowing. The U.S. actually got off pretty lightly. FedEx, one of the companies that were hit in the U.S., but cyber defenses seem to be a little bit better in the U.S. We got kind of a last-minute electronic rescue from one young fellow, and more security has been built up since this has been happening. But over here in the UK, where the hospitals were really hard hit, they're still reeling from this. Today, there are reports that still some surgeries and other kind of treatments that have been canceled. Car companies, rail lines have also been hit in Europe, but now they are getting back up to speed too, as the hunt by Europol and other investigative agencies look for what is really behind this, and we all look at our own defenses. Back to you, Heather.
Yeah, difficult to trace. We'll talk more about it a little bit later. Greg Palcott live for us. Thank you.
So we are waiting for a White House briefing to begin. The president's national security advisor, General H.R. McMaster, set to hold a news conference moments from now after all of this new fallout from reports that the president shared highly classified information with top Russian diplomats. Plus, an accused killer taking the stand in his own defense. Coming up, why he claims a woman's death was just an accident.
She went limp, and at first I thought she had just passed out or something. I've had that happen before. So I stopped, proceeded to start shaking her shoulders. I tapped her on the face a couple times, trying to get her to come around. I was getting no response.
Fox News Alert, we are awaiting a briefing right now at the White House from the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, who last night disputed reports that the president shared classified information during that Oval Office meeting he had with the Russian foreign minister and the Russian ambassador to the U.S. last week. Those allegations first reported by the Washington Post. Greg Miller, a Pulitzer Prize winner, co-wrote that story. He joins us now. A lot of people are awfully confused about what exactly transpired here. When you hear the idea that the president shared sensitive intelligence with the Russians, it sounds like, you know, he said, okay, we have a guy here who said this. That's not exactly what we're talking about, right, Greg?
That's right, and I think the White House has sought to create this sort of confusion about this in an effort to deflect or blunt the impact of the story here. There's two things, you know, that are sensitive in the world of intelligence. One is the information you get, and the other is how you get it. And our story never said that Trump revealed how this information was obtained. It only said that he revealed what was in it. A lot of detail about an evolving Islamic State plot involving laptops and aircraft. And enough detail, in fact, that some sources we talked to thought it would not be that difficult for Russia, which has its own very capable intelligence services, to reverse engineer that and take that information and figure out how the United States came to get it.
And this information was not developed by the United States, but rather one of its partners.
That's right. I mean, that's a critical point here. One of the golden rules in intelligence is that the country, or even sometimes the agency that gathers the information, has control over its dissemination. So this information came from an American ally. The United States did not have permission to pass it along to other countries, let alone Russia.
But the U.S. and Russia both consider ISIS, and this intelligence reportedly was about ISIS. We both consider ISIS an enemy. So what is the harm, potential harm, in giving up information about ISIS?
Yeah, well, and in fact, the United States and Russia do share intelligence on a very limited basis on counterterrorism and other things. If the United States learned about a plot that was going to hurt Russian civilians, I'm sure that the United States would pass that information along. How it got it would be protected. So in this case, I think that the concern is that Russia and the United States, as much as they regard the ISIS as a common enemy, they have really conflicting agendas beyond that in Syria. Russia is backing the Assad regime, which the United States desperately wants to displace. Russia has put a lot of military assets in Syria. A capability like this that helps the United States understand what's happening inside ISIS could also help, conceivably provide intelligence on where Russian military assets are or what Russian planning might be. And Russia would have a keen interest in figuring out that capability.
We are about to hear from H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor. You heard him last night when he stepped to the podium say, "I was in the room. It did not happen." He's essentially denying the thrust of your story. What would you ask him today at that news conference?
I mean, there's a couple things. One, he denied it, but in a carefully worded way without addressing the central points of the story. He said that Trump didn't disclose sources and methods, but that's not what our story asserted, and McMaster knows that. The second thing I would say is that if this was so unproblematic, was so above board, why was it that his own staff then felt it necessary, coming out of this meeting, to call the CIA director, to call the NSA director, and tell them that the boss, President Trump, had just shared too much information with the Russians? Because the CIA and the NSA, those were the agencies that were going to be dealing with the fallout.
So you're suggesting, or maybe he's suggesting, that there's a learning curve to releasing information when you are the president, and this president released more than he should have.
I think there's a lot of concern among serious national security officials in Washington about Trump's discipline, about his ability to protect secrets, about his ability to distinguish what needs to stay classified and what he can share.
The White House, as you might have heard our John Roberts say off the top, is close to apoplectic about the leak of the information that led to your story. What do you say to the White House about the fact that this story is even out there?
I mean, this story is out there and has been confirmed by multiple other news organizations at this point, and I think that it's indicative of one of the problems here, that the White House is really reacting with concern about the leak to news organizations more so than reacting to the disclosures that the president himself made.
Greg Miller, once again a Pulitzer Prize winner from the Washington Post. We appreciate you coming on with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will be having that, we'll take you to that briefing any moment now when it begins, scheduled for 11:30 Eastern.
We sure will. Keep an eye on that. But meantime, a possible suspect has been ID'd in the massive global cyber attack, while experts are more concerned with stopping the spread of the ransomware virus. More ahead.
It's beyond anything that we have seen before, the level of infection and the amount of damage potentially it's inflicting.
Experts now believe that last weekend's missile test out of North Korea put the rogue nation closer than ever to an operational long-range missile that can carry a nuclear warhead. We've told you about that, but now the country is apparently tied to that global cyber attack that is still causing chaos around the world. But cybersecurity experts say that they're now more worried about containing the actual virus. Listen.
Well, it would be satisfying to hold accountable those responsible for this hack. Something that we are working on quite seriously. The worm is in the wild, so to speak, at this point, and patching is the most important message as a result.
And for more, we are joined by Kate Fazzini. She's a cybersecurity reporter for the Wall Street Journal Pro and the paper's online service. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, let's point out that nothing is conclusive. There are digital clues that possibly link North Korea to this ransomware. What are those?
So there is some information within the code that some cybersecurity research firms have looked at that might indicate North Korea. However, it is fairly simple for somebody to also plant some markers that would indicate somebody other than them if they are the guilty party.
And they know that Because it's been used before.
It has been used before,
Lazarus.
yes. Right. Lazarus, I believe back in
involved in that, but that was billions of dollars.
Right.
But this is perhaps not a criminal group because not a lot of money is being made.
That's right. I think that a lot of the speculation is certainly stemming from the fact that if these were criminals behind this attack, they're not very good at crime. They're not making any money off of this. They're not, keeping it quiet. This is a huge, loud attack. Everybody knows about it. All the law enforcement agencies are after them. So, and the bottom line, of course, is they're not making any money. So people are wondering, what was the point of this?
Yeah, because the ransoms being demanded are in bitcoins, but what, like $50,000?
There have been, I believe, some of the figures have been 50,000 total for ransoms paid. However, how the ransomware works is the files are encrypted. You pay the ransom for a decryption key. That decryption key that companies were paying for isn't working. They're not getting their files back. So why would a company then pay going forward?
So overall, I mean, as we wrap it up, I mean, incredibly difficult to trace. And so we're just at the beginning of this.
Just at the beginning. It'll take time.
But you've been working on this before, way before this happened.
Ransomware has been a huge and growing threat at WSJ Pro. We've been looking at this for months. And IBM said that just in 2016 alone, it's been up 6,000%. Around 50% of U.S. companies have been hit by some form of ransomware in the past year.
So we're not paying attention to it enough?
I don't think so.
Okay. So thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And let us know when we discover more information on it.
I will. Thank you.
John?
So we are still waiting for that news conference scheduled to take place a couple of minutes from now at the White House. H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, expected to address those reports in the Washington Post and other places, and that President Trump revealed sensitive intelligence to the Russians during a meeting in the Oval Office last week. When we get that news conference from H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, we will take you back there live. We'll hold a news conference there in the Brady briefing room any minute now. He is expected to address those allegations that the president somehow revealed top secret information to the Russians during that controversial Oval Office meeting he had last week with the Russian foreign minister and the Russian ambassador to the United States. When the National Security Advisor takes to the podium, we will take you there live.
Meantime, there are some new developments in the search for the new FBI director, with 8 candidates in the running to replace James Comey. And for some Democrats, it's not the candidates that are causing concern, but the man who is leading the search, Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And that came up at the White House press briefing.
I think this is a process that's running completely as it should. It's being headed by the Deputy Attorney General, and the Attorney General, as we've noted in the past, the FBI director reports to the Deputy Attorney General. They continue to move through a series of highly qualified candidates, and it's, obviously this is a huge priority for the president to make sure that we have someone that has the ability to administer the proper leadership.
Well, joining us now is Ronald Kessler. He's an award-winning investigative journalist, New York Times best-selling author, and the author of The Bureau, The Secret History of the FBI and The Secrets of the FBI. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, great to be with you.
First of all, I want to get you to comment on this developing story as we wait for this news conference to happen. The director of the FBI, that position, all the more important with all of these leaks coming out of the White House, out of this administration, from all of these organizations. What do you think about that? They say that they're very close to pinpointing where the leaks are coming from.
Well, this just puts more focus on the need for a new FBI director who is not going to take years to learn what the FBI is all about. It's a very complex organization now. It takes literally years to learn the different facets, the issues. You don't want someone who's going to spend his time being a student, and so that's why I think the ideal candidate would be the acting director, Andrew McCabe. It's not the Secret Service where you need someone from the outside to shake up management. FBI is doing its job. And some of these candidates, for example, Merrick Garland, I think would be the worst choice because he has no idea what the FBI is all about today. He has almost no management experience. Fran Townsend was known when she was in the Bush White House to belittle the FBI. She would refer to agents with contempt, say they're incompetent. That was widely known in the Bureau, still is today. You need someone who's going to really protect us, and that, I think, is the current director.
Okay, well, so you're looking for someone with experience that doesn't have to, learn the job from the very beginning. But when you're talking about the acting Deputy Director McCabe, he has close ties to a Clinton ally, the Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. So do you need to go outside to find someone that will not politicize or even possibly politicize the position?
That connection is way overblown. It was a contribution made to his wife before he was named deputy director. I think in this day and age we understand that wives and husbands can have different views, political views, and doesn't influence the other person. Let's be grown up about this. McCabe, I think, came off beautifully in the hearings. He did stand up for Comey. Donald Trump doesn't seem to care about criticism. For example, he's appointed some of the presidential candidates who were very critical of him. So I think he will. I think he'll go with McCabe, in my opinion.
Well, McCabe, as you said, spoke very fondly of Comey just yesterday. Through his support, 100% behind him. You yourself, when you spoke about Jim Comey in the past, you said that he has an impeccable reputation for integrity. What was your reaction when you first heard that he was fired by President Trump?
I was certainly unsettled the way everybody was, but I think the bottom line on this is the memo that Rod Rosenstein wrote, given the fact that he was going to be Comey's boss. Now, if your own boss has no confidence in you, which is what he said about Comey, how can you possibly work for that person? That's the way any organization works. And I think he was worried that Comey would be a loose cannon, would again hold a press conference and reveal information about some pending investigation where there's no prosecution, and that was his right, and certainly the right of the president. Yeah,
I know that you don't necessarily want to talk about the morale in the FBI right now, but someone that has been on the inside and written all of these books regarding the FBI and the inner workings of it, who do you believe in terms of the morale right now? Because we hear from the White House that they have been given their support. People say, we support the fact that you fired him. Then you have other sources within the FBI saying that it was disrespectful in the way that this was handled.
Yeah. Well, just like the rest of us, the FBI is divided. There are some who were very upset about Comey not prosecuting Hillary. There are others who work closely with him who do respect him. You have mixed views. Anybody who thinks they can summarize what the FBI thinks or former agents think really doesn't know the FBI. I've written 3 books on the FBI, one of which led to the dismissal of William Sessions as FBI director over his abuses, the only previous dismissal. And I can tell you there's no single way to summarize FBI views.
All right. Ron Kessler, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Breaking now, as we await that news conference from the National Security Advisor, the State Department is releasing new satellite images of a prison in Syria, where it claims the Assad regime has held mass executions during the 7-year civil war there and cremated the bodies to cover up the killings. John Huddy, live from Jerusalem with the latest.
Yeah, John, this is pretty grisly stuff, once again, that we're hearing from Syria. Syria's foreign ministry said today that it categorically denies the U.S. State Department's allegations of not only the mass killings, but then the incineration of these bodies in a crematorium, as you just mentioned, describing the allegations as a quote-unquote new Hollywood plot and lies. Well, that said, take again a look at these images. The State Department released them yesterday of what the U.S. officials say is the Sanaa prison, which is just outside Damascus, north of Damascus, where U.S. officials say that Syria's government is systematically incinerating the corpses of executed prisoners in a crematorium to cover up the mass executions. One U.S. official said that while the photos were not necessarily definitive evidence, one picture shows several buildings covered in snow and one that isn't, suggesting an internal heat source. And Syrian detainees that were at this prison confirm rancid and terrible smells emails coming from this building and basically describing what is believed, again, to be that crematorium. Now, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's regime, as we know, has been accused of carrying out mass executions, but the accusation that his government is burning the bodies in a crematorium is certainly a new one, despite the fact that the pictures were taken over the course of 4 years. And because of that, some have criticized the Obama administration for not declassifying the photos sooner and basically sitting on them. Well, that said, another round of peace talks is underway in Geneva, aimed at ending Syria's long-running civil war. The timing of the accusations could be to pressure Russia, an ally of Assad's regime, to condemn the mass killings and the incineration of the victims' bodies, as we're talking about. And also, John, what U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, describes as, quote, the horrors of the Syrian regime. John.
Another horrific story from that very troubled part of the world. John Huddy, live from our Mideast Bureau. Thank you. So we are still awaiting the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster. Syria could figure into this on-camera press briefing that he is about to hold. He is expected to address allegations that the president revealed sensitive intelligence to the Russians during that Oval Office meeting last week. The National Security Advisor has said it did not happen. We expect he will continue to be firm in his rebuttals today. When he steps to the podium, we'll take you there live. Big news out of Washington. We are waiting for the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, to hold an on-camera press briefing, and you know it is going to be a tense one. The allegation, first published in the Washington Post last evening, is that President Trump released sensitive national security information to the Russians during that Oval Office meeting last week. Now, the National Security Advisor has disputed the contents of that reporting from the Washington Post, whose reporter we just interviewed a short time ago. We expect a lot of pushback from the National Security Advisor. We don't know whether he will take questions. That will be an interesting part of this. But when it begins, and you'll want to watch it, we'll take you there live. In the meantime, Democratic senators are calling for action on the deadly opioid crisis just this morning. The lawmakers saying an Obamacare repeal would hurt the fight against the epidemic.
And it's been a silent killer for far too long. I haven't had one Republican that I've talked to that basically doesn't know somebody, and not one Democrat. Either their immediate family, extended family, or close friend hasn't been affected. Being a silent killer, we never talked about it. We were afraid to say anything. Oh, it's my son or my daughter, it's my aunt or my uncle, it's my brother or sister. So we'll take care of it, keep it in the family because it's too damaging. I don't want anybody to know about it. Well, guess what? They're dying right and left. Doesn't care who they are. And then have treatment.
That's Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Again, H.R. McMaster about to meet with reporters in the White House briefing room. Our John Roberts, chief White House correspondent, is also there at the White House. We're going to be talking to him momentarily. But again, the allegation is that the president revealed sensitive information to the Russians, the Russian foreign minister and the Russian ambassador, during that controversial Oval Office meeting last week. There's been a lot of pushback on this from the White House and from the National Security Advisor himself. But it is clearly of an issue that the White House feels the need to put him out there again to address the press. We're going to pause for one moment to let our Fox stations join us as we await this briefing from the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, again, who says that this incident involving the president, where he supposedly released sensitive information to the Russians, he says it did not happen. This is Fox News coverage of a news conference by the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster. I'm John Scott in New York. We're going to take you to Washington shortly. This first broke in the Washington Post late yesterday evening. The allegation is that the President Trump, revealed highly classified information to the Russian foreign minister and ambassador to the United States during that controversial visit they made to the Oval Office last week. Now, the intelligence supposedly revealed was not generated by the United States intelligence agencies. It came from some unidentified friendly country. It involved ISIS and the plot to bomb aircraft using laptop computers. Here now is Sean Spicer.
Turkey is shortly going to be arriving at the White House, but prior to his arrival, as I promised, General McMaster is going to give an update on the president's trip that starts this Friday. And I know there are some additional questions regarding some news of the day. So without further ado, General McMaster.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hey, last week we discussed the president's upcoming trip. I promised I'd come back and go through the schedule in more detail. I'm happy to do that today. And Sean tells me there's another topic you might want to talk about as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that after we go through the schedule here. But first of all, Secretary Tillerson will accompany the president for most of the trip, breaking off just before the G7 meeting. And as you know, the trip will begin in Saudi Arabia. It's a historic trip. After an arrival ceremony in Riyadh, the president will have coffee with King Salman, attend a royal banquet, and hold bilateral meetings with the king, the crown prince, and the deputy crown prince. He will also participate in a signing ceremony of several agreements that will further solidify U.S.-Saudi security and economic cooperation. That evening, the president and the first lady will join members of the Saudi royal family for an official dinner. The next day, the president will hold bilateral meetings with Gulf Cooperation Council leaders, as well as broader meetings with all the Gulf state leaders. In the afternoon, he will meet and have lunch with leaders of more than 50 Muslim countries, where he will deliver an inspiring yet direct speech on the need to confront radical ideology and his hopes, the president's hopes, for a peaceful vision of Islam to dominate across the world. The speech is intended to unite the broader Muslim world against common enemies of all civilization and to demonstrate America's commitment to our Muslim partners. The president will then participate in the inauguration of a new center intended to fight radicalism and promote moderation. By establishing and operating this center, our Muslim friends, including Saudi Arabia, are taking a firm stand against extremism and those who use a perverted interpretation of religion to advance their criminal and political agendas. The president also looks forward to participating in a Twitter forum with young people who will be able to live tweet his remarks to people all over the world. The president will then continue on to Jerusalem, where he will meet with President Rivlin and lay a wreath at Yad Vashem. The president will then deliver remarks at the Israel Museum and celebrate the unique history of Israel and of the Jewish people, while reaffirming America's unshakable bond with our closest ally in the Middle East. Later that day, he will meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. That night, the president and the First Lady will join the Prime Minister and Mrs. Netanyahu for a private dinner. The following morning, the president will meet President Abbas in Bethlehem, where he will convey his administration's eagerness to facilitate an agreement that ends the conflict. And he will urge Palestinian leaders to take steps that will help lead to peace. And he will visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and say a prayer at the Western Wall. In Rome the next day, the president will have an audience with the Pope at the Vatican. He looks forward to celebrating the rich contributions of Catholics to America and to the world, and to discussing a range of issues of mutual concern, some of which I summarized last time. Before leaving the Vatican, the president will meet the Cardinal Secretary of State and will tour St. Peter's. Later that afternoon, the president will meet with the King and the Prime Minister of Belgium and the heads of state and government of the host country to the NATO alliance. He'll also meet President Mattarella before departing Rome for Brussels. The next morning, the president will travel to the EU headquarters to meet with the presidents of the European Union and of the European Council. He'll then hold a working lunch with the newly elected president of France, whom he will meet in person for the first time. That afternoon, the president will deliver remarks at the unveiling of NATO's memorial to our shared struggle in front of a piece of the Berlin Wall and a segment of the World Trade Center. He will reaffirm America's commitment to the alliance and repeat his insistence that for the good of the alliance, all members must share responsibility and share burden. Joined by Secretary Mattis, he will participate in the NATO leaders meeting and dinner before then traveling to Sicily for the G7. Throughout the summit, he will meet bilaterally with leaders, including the Italian Prime Minister. In the formal meetings, he will press America's economic agenda and call for greater security cooperation. On the first night of the summit, he will also attend a concert performed by the La Scala Philharmonic Orchestra, followed by a leaders' dinner hosted by the President of Italy. Before departing Italy for home, the President will speak to American and Allied servicemen and women and their families. He will thank them for their sacrifices they all make to keep us safe, and he'll also recap the highlights and accomplishments of the trip. And so I'll ask Sean to call on any of you who have questions. Thanks.
General McMaster.
Thanks a lot, General McMaster. You came out to the stakeout area yesterday, and in coming out to the stakeout area, you said that the Washington Post story, which came out late yesterday afternoon, was false. Do you stick by that assertion? Do you think that every element of that story is false? And do you have anything to correct in terms of what you said at the podium yesterday afternoon?
No, I stand by my statement that I made yesterday. And what I'm saying is really the premise of that article is false, that in any way the President had a conversation that was inappropriate or that resulted in any kind of lapse in national security. And so I think the real issue, and I think what I'd like to see really debated more, is that our national security has been put at risk by those violating confidentiality and those releasing information to the press that could be used connected with other information available to make American citizens and others more vulnerable.
General, was classified information released? General, was classified information released?
Sir, can you tell us if the Prime Minister Netanyahu will join President Trump at the Western Wall, and does the President believe that the Western Wall is part of Israel?
It's part of his. I'm sorry. No Israeli leaders will join.